Okay, so I'm going to apologize beforehand, but once I switch over to show you the PowerPoint, I'm going to kind of get darkened. You can't see me that well, but you can still see me. So let's get started. This continent is where most considered the human race to have started. That means our great, 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 probably quite a few more great grandparents were from. I'm talking about Africa. Africa has seen it all, from the earliest bacterial life to the dinosaurs to the first apes that walked on 2 feet and became known as man. It is truly one of the most remarkable places on this planet. That is why it was so easy for our group to choose this continent. There are many tales to be told about what has happened and how what has happened has shaped Africa into what it is today. So here's our presentation about about a place that turned the unimaginable into the remarkable. Africa by Brock Demo, which is myself, Nicole Cameron, Shianne Cameron, and Kailin Moon. African history, culture, traditions, and religion vary from that of the US. So those are our 4 main points: history, culture, tradition, and religion. I'll be talking about history, Kailin will be covering culture, Nicole will talk about traditions, and finally Shianne will sum it up with religion and give a closure to the speech. So Africa was part of Pangaea, and then Pangaea separated, as we know, became in the places they are today. Africa, like I said, was where the earliest human life was discovered. Before Africa was called Africa, it was called Africa Terra, meaning land of the Afri. Afri just means the people that inhabited the area. So what do you think about when you think about African history? Many of us think about the slaves that got sent over to the Americas to farm and on plantations. But a lot more happened before that. It's just not well known and not taught in our schools because it's not well known. The reason it's not well known is because Africans used an oral system instead of a written one. This means that they passed on information from generation to generation through stories and things like that instead of writing it down. So many things were forgotten, things like the name of great leaders or civilizations that existed in Africa. There are a few civilizations that we do know about, and I'm going to cover those next. The first civilization is going to be the Kingdom of Kush. The Kingdom of Kush formed around 1070 BC. The funny thing about the Kingdom of Kush is that it was conquered by Egypt right after it formed. But then the Kushites, which are the people of the Kingdom of Kush, gained an alliance together and then conquered Egypt back. The Kingdom of Kush was known for its gold and iron resources in which they traded. This means that they were very wealthy. As we know, gold's a very valuable resource, as well as iron was. But they became one of the wealthiest nations, or one of the wealthiest kingdoms, excuse me, in African history. But just like all great empires, they had to come to an end. They were conquered by Ethiopia or destroyed by Ethiopia in 350 CE. CE just means AD as we know it. So here's a few pictures of the Kingdom of Kush. One thing I want to point out is that the pyramids here, these pyramids are where they would bury their dead. And now not many kingdoms could do this. The only reason the Kingdom of Kush could was because of their immense wealth. So move on. Next kingdom is going to be the Kingdom of Benin. Or Benin's, excuse me. The Kingdom of Benin became an empire around 1440 CE, so AD. They were known for their copper and brass, but not just the raw materials that these resources came in, but they were known for the sculptures that they would create out of this. They were involved with Britain for trading, but this relationship actually ended in their destruction after they got into a disagreement with Britain. Britain sent forces over and conquered their land. This is Benin right here, kind of in the Nigeria area. I didn't point out on the map. I showed it, but the Kingdom of Kush is located up in this region, which is just below Egypt, current day Egypt. So here's a few of the sculptures right here and here that they were known for. And then up here is a drawing of what the Kingdom of Benin looked like from someone that had visited. So the last kingdom I want to talk about is the Kingdom of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was one of the greatest kingdoms of African history. As you can see, they were located kind of in southern Africa, but that circle is a lot bigger than the ones that I showed for the other ones. That's because it was an immense, enormous kingdom. And that kingdom formed around the city of Great Zimbabwe. This city was a mystery to many people and still is a mystery. They had gigantic stone structures and walls. Their stone wall that surrounded a portion of the city was 18 feet high and over 900 feet long. Many Europeans that traveled here uh, when they were exploring denied the fact that the black Africans could have built this structure and said that Europeans or whites came before them and built the structures and then they took it over and took it for themselves. Um, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe was important for religious and a trading center. It was a huge area, so it was an enormous religious area, and obviously they covered a lot of land, so the trading was good because they had a lot of resources. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe, or the city, I should say, was compiled of three different areas: the hill complex, the great enclosure, and the ruins. So here's a picture I provided. This right here is going to be the great enclosure. That's that 900 feet wall, or 900 feet long wall, and 18-foot tall. Inside that city was also another enormous structure where the leaders would gather and talk about matters of importance. Here is the Valley of the Ruins. This is where many people lived. Obviously, it doesn't look like it now, but there were quite a few housing structures there that they would live in. And then here's the hill complex. That was a giant stone structure built into the side of some rocks and on a hill. Also known for the Kingdom of Zimbabwe is the actual country of Zimbabwe is now named after it. So now we're going to talk about the scramble of to Africa, or for Africa. This is when the European powers wanted to conquer portions of Africa. They wanted in. They wanted it because a few reasons, mainly economical, political, and social. But the very main reason was economical, and they wanted resources. Not Great Britain, but Europe was actually in a long depression before this, and they found that this would be a way to get themselves out of this depression. So the next few slides are just going to go through some of the areas that each country kind of conquered. So Britain conquered the largest portion. They got southern Africa, kind of eastern, and a little bit in the western area. But mainly, you can see they conquered the area that the Kingdom of Kush was in. This means they got a lot of gold resources. Next, we have France. France conquered quite a large portion, mainly on the west part. Also, the island over here, Madagascar, as we know it. Germany conquered a much smaller portion, kind of in each area, each side of Africa. Belgium, another small portion right in the middle. Portugal, again, a small portion in the southern parts, and then a little tiny portion over on the west side. Italy got a part of northern and then over on the Horn. And then Spain with the smallest portions, just got a little bit up in the northwestern spots, and then a very small portion in the midwestern area. So next we're going to talk about slavery. There was slavery in Africa before Europeans came. Most people don't know this, but the difference between the slavery was that slaves were treated better, and that slaves could actually become part of the government or royal family that they were enslaved in. And they were usually enslaved because they were paying off a debt or paying for a crime they committed. Like I said, they were treated well, they were fed well, they slept well, things like that. So after Europeans came into Africa and enforced slavery, it was a form of slavery called chattel slavery. This means that the slaves were actually becoming property instead of humans. When Europeans came in, it was a much larger scale. They took a lot more people. They would use war and raids to take these people. And then the trade triangle that we know of is where they would take the slaves from Africa over to the U.S., or the Americas, I should say, to plantations to have them work, and then Europe would gain from this. So now I'm going to pass it on to Kailin, who's going to talk about culture.
Just like the history is different for each country, so is their culture. It's what sets us apart, makes us stand out For this topic, I'll be talking about 3 different aspects that has to do with the culture of Africa. The first being African foods. An African meal is kept to a traditional medium. The recipes are usually handed down by their ancestors and kept in the family. Meals include large amounts of starchy food as the center of a meal. Meats and sauces and vegetables are added as fillers for nutrients. Here's a video of some of the foods that they may have. Now, food isn't the only thing that is different in African cultures. Relationships are also very different as far as marriage and just regular dating. Here's my slide for that. For marriage, African women are prepared with classes for the arrangement of marriage before they actually are getting married. The women are taught what to look for in a partner based on their beliefs, background, and ancestry to ensure that their bloodline stays strong. The teachers also warn the women about highs and lows in a marriage, saying that if you don't have lows, your marriage is untested and will not be able to withstand the test of time. And after they have taught the women this, they let the women go in hopes that they find the partner. And as far as dating goes, Africa is a feminist culture, and men are expected to respect women and cater to them without any questions asked. It is frowned upon for women to cater to men for any reason. In Africa, they actually have a huge problem, and it is the fact that half the population is infected with HIV. So that does make it a little bit harder for some of them to date or, get married, any of that. So here's a video of a traditional African wedding. So there's the wedding. And then the last thing that I want to talk about for the culture is actually some of the housing problems that Africans have compared to what we have here in America. After the video, I'm going to show you, you're going to consider the houses around here to be very nice based on what some of the people in Africa face as housing issues. Most of Africa is in poverty, so that does affect their housing, obviously, because they don't have enough money. The area is very rough out there. The walls are made of sand and cement, the floors are sandy, and the roof that they actually have is found from the scrap tin that they usually have on the side of the roads. I'm going to fast forward this a little bit, because this is in news.
A man desperately tries to repair his run-down home. It offers little protection when it rains, and it's bitterly cold in winter. This is how most South Africans live. Sheila has lived in the township of Sun City all her life. To show me how bad conditions are, she takes me to see her neighbor's home.
This is the new your house?
Uh-huh.
Still leaking?
Still leaking. From the roof?
Yes, from the roof.
Uh-huh.
Built by the council,
Uh-huh.
but it's still leaking.
So it's just as bad as the other one?
It's bad.
How many people are sleeping in here?
There are 5 inside here.
5 in this whole room.
They're using this shack as a bathroom, as a kitchen, as a lounge, as anything. This is their only room.
Politicians are working on building proper houses, but the amount of people on the waiting list is overwhelming. These are some of the new houses government promised township dwellers more than 10 years ago. But the reality is that thousands of people are still living in squalid conditions like this, and they're getting more and more impatient. Under apartheid, very few homes were built for black Africans. So when the ANC-led government came into power in 1994, they had the mammoth task of addressing this imbalance. But it's a slow process, and some South Africans feel their government is not doing enough to help them. Allegations that some politicians are mismanaging housing funds don't help.
Government doesn't do anything to Sun City. It's wrong what government done. While they can step on the ladder, they don't care for the people in Sun City.
Government is asking people to be patient.
If you are in a house, if you cannot buy the furniture, the TV, the bedroom in a one time. So you must wait for your turn.
But it's hard to ask someone to be patient when they live like this. Parents want to take their children out of this place. Their biggest fear is that their government will let them down, and that their children will spend their entire lives sleeping in corrugated steel shacks. Harun Matasa, Al Jazeera, Eastern Cape, South Africa.
So just like the housing is different, the food is different, the relationships differ a little from Africa to America, so do the traditions that we're going to be talking about next.
As Kailin said, I will be talking about African traditions. There are many tribes in Africa, and with each tribe comes different traditions. I'm going to be talking about 3 different tribes and one of their traditions that they do. Most of them have multiple traditions, so I have just narrowed it down to one for each tribe. The first tribe I will be talking about is the Bantu tribe. The Bantu tribe has a tradition of kidnapping their bride. And another tribe that also does this is the Buganda, or otherwise known as Ganda tribe, but I will not be talking about that because theirs is a little bit more brutal than the kidnapping of the brides in the Bantu tribe. In the Bantu tribe, the bride is kidnapped by the guests, and they will then set a ransom for the bride for the groom to pay. If the groom decides that the bride is worth that money, then he will pay it and they will be married. If he doesn't think that she's worth that amount of money, then they will not be married and he will go on to find another wife at some other point. I have a couple of pictures here on the slide. On this side is the traditional attire for a Bantu bride, and then over on this side is a picture of the bride being kidnapped by the guests. And all of this information can be found on the African Wedding Traditions website, where they discuss how the Bantu tribe is actually is different from the Buganda tribe's wedding tradition. The next tribe that I will be talking about is the Buganda tribe and their tradition of naming their children. When a baby is born, they keep the umbilical cord and they will put it in water. If the umbilical cord sinks, then the baby is shunned from the tribe and is to leave immediately. If the umbilical cord floats, then the baby is accepted into the tribe and is then taken to the ceremony to be named. At this ceremony, the leader of the tribe will give the baby a name. It is usually a name that is meaningful to the tribe in some way. I have a video for you to watch on the naming of the ceremony. I couldn't find one with the umbilical cord because they normally do not allow this to be filmed, so the umbilical cord part, they will allow this part. So here is the naming ceremony. And the mother is the one in the white.
Has decided to give you the traditional name of Yen.
So as you can see that the son was given Yen, or the name of Yen, and it is the founder of the Bamount dynasty.
Your name is Yen, and I want to call your attention to the fact that Yen was the mother of Shah Yen, the founder of this dynasty.
So now they will go on to name a few other babies as well. Sometimes they do it in groups, and they'll name multiple babies at once, and each one gets a different name, obviously. Another thing that I found very interesting with the Buganda or Ganda tribe is that instead of the parents raising the children, the paternal uncle actually raises the children. So this is very different from the American traditions where the parents will raise their children. And I thought it was interesting because it would almost be like, you know, here if your aunt and uncle raised you instead, and then your parents took on that aunt or uncle position, because the parents are not out of the child's life in Africa. They still are there at every event and so on and so forth. The Bridgewater College actually investigated this and just looked into it to see exactly how it worked and if the parents, you know, were able to see their children, and they were able to go to every event that the child was involved in, their birthdays, their ceremonies like this and such. The next tradition I'm going to talk about is by the Hammer tribe, and it is called bull jumping. And this is done when a young man is going to come of age or reach manhood. So he must jump over the bulls in the nude. So I did find a video, but there is some nudity, just a forewarning, because you can't find it without it, because it is a ritual that's done in the nude. I have a picture over here of a man jumping across them. They run across them, like there's a few bulls that are lined up, and they just run back and forth across them. I found a video here to show you just a quick little thing. They're just trying to round up the bulls because they keep running away, so.
That's one bull got away. That's a bit of a road.
With a man at each end, the cows are held in place. The young man takes his first run-up.
At these ceremonies, they continue to run back and forth across the bulls like that, and they also do whipping. They whip the women as just a ritual part of the ceremony, and it's not out of anger or anything, it's just a part of the ceremony. This is the last tradition that I'm going to be talking about. There are many other African traditions that I didn't even touch on. I just thought these were some of the more interesting ones that I found. So now I'm going to turn it over to Shianne, and she's going to talk about African religion.
Today I'm going to be talking to you about African religion. There are three main religions in Africa today: Christianity, Islam, and then the traditional ancient African religion. 95% of the population believe in one of these three types of religion. The religions are vast and they vary from which part of Africa the person is from. Most people of Africa are religious, and it usually plays a huge part and centers their life. I'm going to talk about Christianity first. Christianity is when a person believes in the teaching of Jesus Christ. It is mostly embraced in the Southern Africa, Southeast Africa, Central Africa, and then some parts of Northwest and West Africa. Christianity began in Africa around 2,000 years ago, starting in Northern Africa and Egypt. The religion spread quickly in the first 5 centuries, and the numbers are still increasing, with thousands converting over every day. In 2002, it was estimated that 45% of the continent's population believed in the Christian values. They believe that God is the creator of all things. Southern Africa is called the Rainbow Nation because of the wide variety of people, cultures, and religions. They also have a constitution that protects their people to have freedom of religion, much like that of the United States. Islam. Islam was created by Muhammad in the 7th century. Islam is embraced mostly by the north and west parts of Africa. Africa was the first continent that Islam spread to from Asia, with about 45% of the continent practicing the religion. African people make up around 1/3% of the Muslim population. Ancient traditional religion. The ancient traditional religion is the religion based on oral traditions rather than spiritual. This religion is passed down from generation to generation, with the eldest of the family being the authority figure and is the one in charge. This religion is based on stories, myths, and tales told by their ancestors. The community is the most important part of their life, because they all share the same beliefs and traditions as one another. They believe in many different concepts, like reincarnation, nature spirits, sacrifice, the use of magic, and traditional medicine. Nature spirits is when they believe in earth, water, and air to do good. They believe in sacrificing their food and animals. They believe in traditional medicine using herbs to treat illnesses rather than modern medicine. They believe that when someone dies, they have a ritual that they do to ensure the well-being of the dead. One ritual they do, giving the deceased a correct funeral, with many religious ceremonies that are included. If they don't do this, they fear that the dead will become a wandering ghost, which prevents the dead from living properly after death. When a person dies in a house, they are removed from a hole in the wall, rather than the door, because they believe the dead will not remember their way back into the living in the house. The windows, mirrors, and televisions are smeared with ash, and the pictures on the wall are all turned around. A day before the funeral, the deceased is returned home to their room, where a night vigil takes place, usually lasting until the morning. At the funeral, an animal is usually killed because they believe the animal will help the deceased back to the family. Personal belongings are often buried with the deceased to help with the journey back home. African funerals are a community affair, and everyone feels the grief of it. Sometimes, in some parts of the community, unmarried women and children are unable to attend. Africans have religious concepts of the afterlife too. Almost all African people believe in a supreme creator, and when a person dies, they are somehow closer to the God. They believe in the concept of reincarnation. They believe that when someone dies, they will be reborn again into the body of another. Although, if this person was a bad person, like a murderer or a witch, they believe that the person is reborn into an animal instead. Most religions are vastly different to which part of Africa the person is from. Each community have their own rituals that take place. In conclusion, we talked about how Africans have great history, like the European invasion and slavery, how their cultures affect their meals and housing, how their traditions include kidnapping the bride and the African bull jumping, and then the religious views such as Christianity and Islam. As you see, African history, culture, traditions, and religions vary from that of the United States. Africa is a wildly unique continent with so many interesting concepts to explore.